Okay, well, I guess we're going to start then. Um, it's a little unusual not seeing anybody, but I know you're there because Gustav told me that you are. I see 23 people have joined. That's great. So welcome to our town hall. And today we're, let me see now. I have a couple of introductions to do first of our participants. Maybe I'll start with myself. My name is Dave Frigette. I'm the National Executive Director of the Directors Guild of Canada. And today, the subject for today is to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the financial benefits that the federal government has put into place to support workers and Canadians across the country. And so the game plan is that we have a couple of, we have two experts with us to go through some of the topic and follow that with some questions. So let me start with introductions. First, he'll be joining us in a few minutes. We're going to have Arif Virani, who is the Member of Parliament for High Park, Parkdale. Arif was elected in 2016 and re-elected, so he's in his second term. He's also served as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada since 2018. Previously, he served as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, helping welcome the first wave of 25,000 Syrian refugees in 2015. And from 2017 to 18, he served as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Heritage, overseeing multiculturalism and helping co-develop Canada's first ever Indigenous language legislation. Arif would be familiar to many of us here at the Guild. He was instrumental in some of the work that we did over that period on public policy. So it'll be great to see Arif. Chloe, I didn't ask you how to pronounce your family name. I'm going to try Godkewitsch.
No.
Okay. I should have asked. Chloe's a partner in the Toronto office of Goldblatt Partners, a graduate of Osgoode Hall Law School. Clio was called to the Ontario Bar in 2002. She provides advice on all types of workplace compensation matters to employees and their representatives and to boards of trustees and administrators of pension and benefit trusts. Clio, so I got both your names wrong, apologies. Clio is a frequent contributor to various legal publications and edited a leading pension and employee benefits publication for over 10 years. She's a regular speaker at legal conferences and client seminars. She's a member of the Pension Section Executive of the Ontario Bar Association, a member of the Canadian Association of Labour Lawyers, the Canadian Pension and Benefits Institute, and the International Foundation. Those are two experts. Welcome to both of you. It's great to have you here. So we're gonna, so a word of introduction and it's just some housekeeping notes on the agenda. First, we're gonna start hearing from Clio, who has a short presentation outlining the various government benefits that have been put into place. The government has acted quickly implementing these programs to support workers displaced by the COVID crisis, and these benefits have themselves been modified by government to respond to feedback from stakeholders, such as the Directors Guild, who intervened early to both encourage the government to act and to make updates to the program as needed. DGC members are freelancers and work on contract basis, as we all know. And as we all also know, many members also work through loan-out corporations, so programs like employment insurance don't always work for us. These new benefits are designed to capture these types of situations, and largely, not completely, but largely they have. But there are still questions about how they work and which may be the best options depending on your circumstances. So it's great that we have experts with us today who can take us through how the programs work and who is eligible, how the application process works, and answer some of your questions. One note though, we're going to try and keep this relatively big picture today, as no two situations are exactly the same. And of course, it goes without saying, we recommend getting expert advice for your particular situation. Hopefully though, with this session, you'll have a better understanding of the fundamentals and know what questions to ask your accountant or your tax expert to help you make the best decision. We also are fortunate to have Arif Virani with us. and he'll be joining shortly and have some insights for us on the government's perspective. And we're looking forward to that. Once we do both of those activities, that we'll have some time for questions. And there's three ways we can have questions to our panelists. The first is, some of you sent in questions in advance, so we have those ready, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. The second is, now this is the part that gets technical for me, so I'm just going to make sure I get it right. If you hover your cursor over the screen, you'll see three icons appearing at the bottom: chat, raise hand, and Q&A. You can submit a question in writing using the Q&A option, so it's down around the middle of the screen at the bottom, or click raise your hand to put yourself in the lineup if you'd like to ask a live question. Keeping in mind, if you do the raise your hand option and would like to ask the question live, you have to have a microphone in your setup, your phone or your laptop. The chat button also allows you to chat with fellow attendees throughout the town hall, but don't send your question through the chat, because we're not going to be monitoring that. We're going to be looking at the Q&A option. So there's three places questions can emerge. But we have about an hour and a half, so we'll get started and we'll get to as many questions as we can once the presentation happens. And one last thing on the questions. In all likelihood, we may not get to every question today. So what we're going to try to do is, we're making a record of the questions, and anything that we don't get to, there's already an FAQ on the DGC's website where we have some questions answered, and that's being updated as we go along. And any questions that we don't get to today, we'll try to have written answers for you on there. So that way we'll have been able to get to everybody. So on that basis, I think we're ready now for Clio. Do I need to press share screen?
I think I'm going to do that.
Oh, excellent. Good. Over to you, Clio.
Okay. Okay. All right, I think I have it there. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Clio Godkewitsch, and I work at Goldblatt Partners in Toronto. Thank you to the DGC for inviting me to speak with your members today. It feels a bit trite to say that we're in an extraordinary time brought about by this pandemic, and the impact on businesses and employees are really only just emerging, and it's feared will endure well beyond the immediate crisis. Most workplaces have had to rapidly adapt to remote work arrangements, in some cases changing the focus of their operations, and unfortunately in many cases reducing work or closing down altogether. So today I'm going to be outlining two federal government responses to this public health and economic crisis, which are new. The first is the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit for workers, and the second is the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy for employers. So just a couple disclaimers about the content of this presentation. I wouldn't be a good lawyer if I didn't do this. We do our best to give you current information based on enacted legislation, but in some cases, the legislation just hasn't caught up with the announcements of the government. So really it needs to be treated as current, but subject to refinement, change, and perhaps even expansion over time. And finally, the presentation is really for information purposes and not legal or financial advice or recommendations about whether any one individual or workplace should pursue these programs. So getting right into it, the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB for short. This is a temporary program that is really intended to put money in the pockets of workers who have stopped working because of the pandemic or who have experienced a very substantial reduction to their earnings from work because of the pandemic. It was enacted under the Federal COVID-19 Emergency Response Act just about a month ago now. So this benefit is available to any worker, which is quite broadly defined. And the criteria that an individual has to satisfy to qualify as a worker for purposes of the CERB are that they are at least 15 years old, that they reside in Canada, and this is not a requirement that they be a citizen, a Canadian citizen, or have any other particular status, simply that they live in Canada. And third, they must have had a total income of at least $5,000 in either 2019 or in the 12-month period immediately prior to their application for the CERB. So in determining whether a worker meets this $5,000 income threshold to be eligible, you can look at income not just from employment, but from any combination of employment income, self-employment income, EI, employment insurance, maternity and parental benefits, as well as similar benefits that are paid in Quebec under the Quebec Parental Insurance Plan. The next criterion for eligibility for the CERB is that the worker must have ceased working for reasons related to COVID-19 for at least 14 consecutive days within the 4-week period for which they initially applied for the CERB, or they have seen a loss or serious reduction in work related to COVID-19 for that period. So what are COVID-19 related reasons that you might have stopped working or reduced your work? These can include most clearly losing your job because the employer has shut down, whether it's permanent or temporary. But it also includes being unable to work because you are in quarantine at the recommendation of public health officials. Or also it could include simply having to stay home to take care of children due to school, daycare closures, or elders. What is crystal clear is that a worker who has voluntarily resigned or quit their employment will not be eligible for the CERB. Now, initially the CERB was not going to be available to workers who received any amount of income in a given period, but the government, as Dave mentioned at the outset, was strongly lobbied and soon recognized that this included a very substantial number of workers, and so the program was expanded to include support for people who may still be working but earning $1,000 or less per month. So when submitting a first or initial claim, a worker cannot have earned more than $1,000 in income for 14 or more consecutive days within that initial 4-week benefit period of the claim. And then for subsequent periods, a worker cannot have earned more than $1,000 in income for the entire 4-week benefit period of a new claim. So if a worker isn't a full-time employee, or wasn't a full-time employee, or if they are self-employed or an independent contractor, the same rules are going to apply. That is, if you stopped working because of COVID-19 or have reduced work because of the pandemic, and you do not earn more than $1,000 in a period of at least 14 consecutive days in the first benefit period, and for the entire 4-week benefit period of any subsequent claim, you will be eligible for the CERB. Incidentally, the government has also recognized that small business owners might receive their income from business in different ways. It could be through a salary or wage, but it could also be by business income or dividends. So if you're looking to determine your eligibility for the CERB and you are a small business owner, there are guidelines about how you should measure your income.
Clio, sorry to interrupt. I'm not sure the PowerPoint is advancing on the screen. I'm just seeing that first one still. So I'm not sure if there's something you need to do to have it be full screen.
Okay, that's certainly not the intention. Let me see if I stop share and try again.
That's it. Perfect.
Are you seeing slide 8?
Yes, slide 8. Thanks.
Are you seeing slide 9 now?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, good. Just want to feel free to interrupt if it doesn't advance for some reason.
Okay.
Okay, so in addition to expanding the CERB to workers who might have some limited income, the government also announced a couple of weeks ago that the CERB would be extended to seasonal workers who were receiving EI benefits, regular benefits, and exhausted those benefits and are unable to undertake their regular seasonal work because of COVID-19. As well, the CERB has been extended to workers who have recently exhausted their EI regular benefits and simply aren't able to find a job because of the economic downturn. So CERB eligibility and payment is for a 4-week period, and the maximum that an individual can receive the CERB is 16 weeks, or a total of 4 periods. And these 4 periods must fall between March 15th, 2020 to October 3rd, 2020. Now, the amount of the CERB is supposed to be prescribed in a regulation, which to my knowledge doesn't actually exist, but it doesn't seem to matter because the government has made it very clear, and it has in fact started paying the benefit of $2,000 for each 4-week period. Now, unlike EI regular benefits, the CERB is not income tested. So the same $500 weekly benefit is paid regardless of whether the employee was part-time or full-time status or what their earnings were. The CERB is treated as taxable income, but the government has stated that it is not withholding taxes from the payments at source. So it will have to be reported in income tax returns next year. Applications began for the CERB almost 4 weeks ago now, on April 6th, through the CRA and Service Canada. And my understanding is that many workers have already started to receive the benefit. There are online tools that can help individuals to determine where to apply and what documentation is necessary. So as mentioned a couple moments ago, the benefit is currently only available for periods of reduced work or no work because of COVID-19 that fall between March 15th to October 3rd, 2020. Now, workers who are still unemployed after they've received 16 weeks of the CERB within that period, and who might otherwise be eligible for EI regular or sickness benefits, would be able to access EI after October 3rd. All applications for the CERB must be made by December 2nd, 2020. And I just note that the maximum period of eligibility, this 16 weeks, and the duration of the program from March to October these might change depending on how the pandemic and work restrictions unfold. So recognizing the very unique nature of this benefit, the legislation also makes it clear that the CERB cannot be diverted from the worker to other purposes, kind of like we see with registered pension plan benefits. So it cannot be assigned, charged, or attached, given as security, cannot be used to set off any kind of debt of the individual. And it is not garnishable for the purposes of family law orders for spousal support or child support. I'm going to turn now to the second program, the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, or CEWS. So this program was first announced by the federal government on March 27th, 2020, but it wasn't until a few weeks later, on April 11th, that it actually passed legislation creating an expanded wage subsidy program. And in a nutshell, this program provides government assistance to employers that can substantiate a decrease in their revenues as a direct result of the economic circumstances arising from COVID-19. So the CEWS gives financial support to employers and is really aimed at forestalling or preventing workplace layoffs, even if the employer doesn't necessarily have the work available to justify retaining its employees. This wage subsidy might nonetheless enable employers to keep them on the payroll. It's also to encourage employers to rehire employees that it has had to lay off temporarily and bring them back into the job market. And of course, the long-term goal of this program is to get back to business as usual as soon as possible when the pandemic subsides or is hopefully over entirely. Now, although this program is called a wage subsidy, the government is not actually paying employees' wages directly. It's more accurate to call it a wage-related subsidy because the amount of the subsidy is tied to the remuneration an employer is paying to the employee. The subsidy is made to the employer, and the employer in turn pays the employee their wages. So there are two steps to determine if an employer is eligible for this program. First, it has to meet the definition of being an eligible entity. This is very broad and includes most kinds of businesses in Canada, includes individuals, traditional corporations, taxable corporations, also partnerships, which may be made up of other kinds of employers, nonprofit organizations, and registered charities, and also unions. But in addition to being an eligible entity, the employer has to also have or demonstrate a threshold reduction in their revenue to qualify for the subsidy. Just to note that the public sector employers like municipalities and school boards and hospitals and universities and colleges, they are not eligible for this benefit. This is really aimed at private enterprises and non-governmental organizations. So if an employer is an eligible entity, then the next step is to determine if it qualifies for the wage subsidy because of a revenue reduction over the eligible periods. There are 3 periods of 4 weeks each from March 15th to June 6, 2020, or a total period of 12 weeks. And if the employer has suffered a drop of at least 15% of their qualifying revenues in March 2020 and 30% in April and May, as compared to a prior reference period, then they can claim the subsidy. So what qualifies as revenue for comparison purposes? And that is revenue that is made in Canada and earned from arm's length sources and should arise in the ordinary course of activities like the sale of goods or provision of services. Now, the required revenue reduction can be established by comparing the revenue from the corresponding month in 2019 or a comparison to the average revenue earned by the entity in January and February 2020. So you can look at March 2020 compared to March 2019, or you can look at March 2020 compared to the average of January and February 2020. And the entity has to select one of these approaches when first applying for the program, and whatever prior reference period that they use, this will have to apply for the duration of the program. Now, how do you calculate revenue? Well, you're supposed to use the employer's normal accounting method. Although an employer can choose to determine its revenues on a cash or accrual basis, but again, the basis that they adopt has to be used for all qualifying periods of the program. Any kind of revenues from extraordinary items are excluded from this measure, as are the subsidies received under this program and the temporary wage subsidy program. Now, if an entity or employer qualifies for the wage subsidy in a given period, it will automatically qualify for the subsidy in the immediately following eligible period. So for example, if the employer with a revenue drop of more than 15% in March qualifies for that first period, it will automatically qualify for the second period of program. So what kind of worker compensation can be covered by the wage subsidy? Well, it can cover salary, straight up salary and wages, but also other remuneration like the employer cost of health and other welfare benefits. But compensation that is in the form of severance pay and stock option benefits are not to be covered by this wage subsidy program. They're not eligible forms of compensation. The program also has certain restrictions aimed at preventing employers from entering into any kind of arrangements that might increase their subsidy amount. So as a result, any kind of remuneration that can reasonably be expected to be repaid by an employee or returned directly or indirectly to the employer, and remuneration paid that is in excess of an employee's pre-crisis remuneration is excluded from the subsidy calculation. The program will provide a subsidy of 75% of the eligible remuneration paid by the employer to each employee to a maximum of $847 per week. So this basic maximum of $847 a week will generally be the amount of the subsidy for employees who earn $1,129 or above on a weekly basis. Employees who earn less than $1129.32 per week, the amount of the subsidy is generally 75% of what they get paid. So when applying for this wage subsidy program and calculating remuneration, employers will have to look at an employee's baseline remuneration. So this is really the average weekly remuneration that's paid to the employee during the period from January 1, 2020 to March 15th, 2020. The employer can also exclude from that period any time off of the employee, which was 7 or more days. So that isn't artificially depressed. For employees that might be hired during the course of this pandemic and for a term that the employer is covered by the wage subsidy program, it'll be based solely on the actual remuneration paid to the employee, subject, of course, to the $847 weekly maximum. There are special rules that apply for non-employees. And finally, there's no cap on the aggregate amount of the subsidy that can be provided to an employer. But it may be reduced by payments received by the employer or the employee under other COVID-19 relief measures. Applications for the wage subsidy program started, I believe, earlier this week and are expected to be processed within 10 days of the application date, unless, of course, further information is required for it to be processed. The subsidy payments are income to the employer and will have to be reported in next year's tax filings. And if an employer receives a wage subsidy and subsequently is determined to be ineligible for the program in a certain period, they will have to repay any amounts received in that period. Penalties may apply in cases of fraudulent claims, which could include anything from fines to more serious repercussions. And finally, if an employer artificially reduces their revenue for the purposes of trying to access this wage subsidy, it will be required to repay any subsidy amounts received, plus a penalty of up to 25% of the total value. Okay, so this is my last slide, and the CERB and the wage subsidy are two separate programs. The first was aimed at workers, and the second at employers. But there is some overlap, and the government has been quite clear that it intends for these benefits to be integrated. So, for example, there are rules under the wage subsidy program which aim to prevent employers from claiming the wage subsidy for an employee that was also able to claim the CERB in a period. And where there may be payments for both CERB and wage subsidy for the same period, the government has indicated its intention to recoup any double payments, and most likely that will be sought against the individual employee. So if an employee is aware that their employer is receiving a wage subsidy, it's best not to apply for the CERB and possibly become responsible down the road to repay it. So that concludes the formal presentation part. I will try to stop the slideshow.
Thank you very much, Clio. Oh, we're back. Excellent. And we have Arif. Virani has joined us. Arif, it's great to see you. But just a couple of things. First is, by the way, thank you for that excellent, comprehensive trip through both of those programs to help us understand them and kind of unpack it all. Keeping in mind that the Directors Guild is also an employer, and that and we have a payroll, and we've made an application for the support. So we're grateful for that too. So thank you for, two things occur to me. The first is that you did a great job of answering in advance a lot of the questions that people may have and so on. But of course, like any good presentation, it probably successfully prompted more questions. This is a reminder for those listening out there in internet land to use the Q&A button, or to put your hand up virtually if you'd like to ask a question live, when we get to that in a few minutes. But before we do that, I wanted to just introduce Arif and give him the opportunity to take what is an excellent summary of the programs and perhaps give us the government's perspective. Start with, this is obviously a response to the crisis and what you've been hearing from Canadians and from stakeholders like us. So perhaps you could share some of your thoughts on the government's perspective on the crisis, the benefits programs, and maybe what you see as next steps, and kind of where do we go from here. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on. I appreciate it. Thank you to the DGC for hosting this. Thank you, Clio. We don't know each other, but I know your firm quite well. So say hi to Charlie for me. He's a good friend of mine. I wasn't on for the full slide deck, but I caught most of what you were summarizing with respect to the CEWS program. So I just wanted to start out by saying, obviously, I mean, this is a sort of a difficult situation that we're in, right? And just in terms of sort of just opening remarks, it's gone on for many, many weeks, and it's going to go on for many, many weeks more. And that's difficult, and we're facing challenges that we've never faced as a government, and we're responding to those challenges. But the best thing that I could say, and I did a previous session with a portion of DGC members, I think just for Ontario at that point, is that it's very much a dynamic process. So if you find yourself questioning about specificity, or you have a particular concern and you're wondering whether your particular scenario is caught, it may very well not be, but that is not through some sort of malafides on our part. It is simply because we are now rolling out programs that sometimes in a pre-COVID world might take about 18 months to design and deliver, and now they're taking 18 days or 8 days or 4 days sometimes. We're rolling things out very, very fast, and that's why there is by necessity a lot of tweaking that is happening. But that tweaking is a good thing, so I think that should give you some comfort. And I'll give you just a very tangible example. I believe Clio's presentation would have covered a bit about the CERB, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. When it originally rolled out, you needed to have received 0 income in the previous 14 days in order to be eligible. I heard a lot from my constituents in Parkdale High Park and other parts of Toronto who said that, Reef, I work in the creative arts, I'm making a little bit of money, not 0 money, but I'm certainly not making the money that I used to make, and I can't afford to pay my bills. I don't think it's fair that I'm being excluded entirely from this income security benefit. We heard that loudly and clearly. We changed the benefit. So now you can receive up to $1,000 of income, whether that's on a wage or some sort of contract, etc. And that does not preclude you from receiving the CERB. It in fact allows you to still receive the CERB. And in fact, it allows you to receive more money in total. So you can receive up to $2,900 in a given month, for example. So that's a good change, I think, because it shows that we are sort of responding to people's situations on the ground, and that it is very much a dynamic process. In terms of sort of, I'll just mention a couple of things, is that we've ebbed and flowed through this through a number of different sort of iterations. At the start of this crisis, it was, Arif, is this real? Yes, it's real, and isolation is important, and so is washing your hands. So I'll just reiterate that once again as good public health messaging. But secondly, it was, Arif, I'm stuck in Cuba, Peru, South Africa, Nepal. There was a lot of consular assistance that we were providing to individuals. Then it morphed into, Arif, I can't pay my bills. And that's when that CERB allotment came to the fore, and that $2,000 per month that's available to provide basic income security. And since then, it's morphed into supporting business. And the supports for businesses are threefold. I'm not sure how much has been discussed about the 3 main programs, but they are the Canada Emergency Business Account loan, up to 25% of which is forgivable, as in you don't need to pay it back. A rental assistance program that is about to launch in the middle of this month that helps commercial businesses with their commercial rents. And lastly, the wage subsidy program that Claire was mentioning in her slide deck, which helps with employers ability to pay their employees and keep them on the payroll, because we want people to remain on the payroll. And in terms of, Dave, what you asked me at the very end is sort of where we are at now. We're both looking at sort of, it's sort of bifurcated, where we need to tweak the programs to ensure that there aren't people falling through gaps or cracks. But also we're actively thinking about what a transition into the post-COVID economy will look like, what that looks like for directors, what that looks like for people in the creative arts, but also what that looks like for every other Canadian. How we manage that, what kind of stages it goes through, et cetera. And when we actually start to wean people off of some of these benefits that have now been in place for some weeks. So that's some of the thinking that's going on at the government level. So I'll leave it at that right now, and I'm sure there's lots of specific questions, so happy to take those as you see fit, Dave.
Thank you very much. That's was an excellent overview. You mentioned, maybe I'm going to bypass my own list of questions and ask you, if you, Arif, if you wouldn't mind, just take a second and tell us a little bit more about the emergency support for small business with the business loans. What is the? I used to do policy, so you'll forgive me. What is the public policy behind that? Is to look to support businesses just to keep the doors open? What are you looking at? What types of expenses are these loans looking to be supporting businesses in doing, or is it just a general support to keep enterprises going?
So it's a bit of all of that, to be frank, Dave. And it was conceived prior to the targeted rent assistance that we're rolling out sort of as we speak, and will launch in the middle of May. But the original notion of the CEBA, the Canada Emergency Business Account Loan, was one to provide ready liquidity to small businesses around the country. So that could be a mom and pop convenience store. It could be something that's larger that might employ 5 employees. It can be anything up to a payroll eligibility of 1.5 million. So it's fairly large in terms of its conception. It was meant to help you potentially deal with your rent, deal with your overhead, deal with the loss of revenue that is coming into your business because people simply are not frequenting your store. And in another example of sort of the dynamic nature of this process, when we originally conceived of it, we said, you'll go and receive it from your local bank. So we removed ourselves from the sort of application process. So you go to TD or BMO or wherever you bank, and you reach out to them there. But secondly, we also said the payroll eligibility needed to be you had to have a payroll of between $50,000 and $1 million. And we heard on both ends of the spectrum that wasn't adequate. It was too high for some and not high enough for others. So we changed that, and we've made it eligible for entities as small as a $20,000 payroll and as large as a $1.5 million payroll. So it covers a larger group of businesses, which is important, but it's meant to provide immediate stopgap assistance. And the nice features of it are twofold. One is that it bears 0 interest. So you're basically given money and you're asked to repay the money, and there's no charge to you in the interim. And if you were able to, and you can take as much as $40,000, you don't have to take 40,000, you can take as much as 40. And if you were able to pay it off by the end of December in 2022, then 25% of what you borrowed is a grant to you. So hypothetically, you borrowed $40,000. If you can pay $30,000 by the December 31st, 2022, $10,000 is yours as a grant from the government of Canada to alleviate the situation that we're in with COVID. So it's proven very attractive for a number of businesses that have accessed it. We are dealing with some tweaks to the program because some businesses have indicated that there still seems to be potentially a few gaps. We've heard a lot from businesses that are in a contract type situation, or businesses that use dividends and don't use traditional payroll. So we're working on those tweaks as well. But that's right. The CEBA.
So it's not a pool of money that is exhausted. It's if you qualify and you meet the eligibility criteria, then you can access the up to $40,000 if your business is eligible. But we've heard stories elsewhere, I mean, outside of Canada, where there's pools of money available and it becomes a bit of a land rush for who gets in first and that type. But that's not what we're talking about here. This is open-ended. If you qualify, the money is there for you, and then the terms to repay include the forgivable portion if you pay it by the end of the year.
Absolutely. There's no sort of hard cap on it, like up to a total set of loans that total $100 million or $1 billion. There's no cap on that as such. We've worked, Minister Morno in particular has worked very closely with all of the chartered banks to ensure that they're providing this. We backstop the loans, right? So if there's defaults, that falls on us, but that's what we're doing as a government to ensure that the banks are secured in the credit that they're providing to their customers.
Right. Good. Excellent.
There's in the order of 600,000 that have been already accessed around the country. 600,000.
I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I would imagine the percentage of businesses that are covered is probably very high, and that that threshold that you're talking about. There are large corporations that are at one end of the spectrum, but most businesses in Canada are small and medium sized. So it sounds like the target is really that end of the spectrum, and that's really where the action is in terms of the numbers.
That's very much the case. I don't remember, this goes back sort of a couple of years back, but so there's about 1.8 million businesses in Canada, and about 40,000 of them have revenues of over $10 million. And the vast majority are small and medium-sized enterprises. I feel like it was around 1.4 million of them are in the SME category. So that's a sweet spot that we're trying to target. And the logic is that, I mean, it's somewhat self-evident, but a $40,000 loan is not necessarily going to assist a company or a business that does $3 million in payroll, for example. So we're trying to get different benefits for an entity that's that large.
Sure. So these benefits are each meant to complement each other in some ways. If I'd say in conversations with members over the last few weeks, and certainly when we sent out a request for questions, and even among some of the questions that have already popped up on my screen, I'd say that there are, on the greatest hits for questions around the CERB and the wage subsidy program, there are two that come up. So I'm going to start with both of those.
Sure.
Because that's obviously what's on our members' minds. And the first one speaks to CERB eligibility. Clio, you might want to have a first go at this one. Are there any updates or confirmations on whether film workers are considered seasonal workers, and how to demonstrate that they would likely have been working since March the 15th? This is the member writes, I noticed there's no longer any mention of seasonal workers in the eligibility FAQ or on the CERB portal when I double checked this morning. Does this mean there have been further changes? And I'll just sum this up by, while we were speaking here, I think it was one of our director members who summed this up in one sentence. How do I prove that I would have been working? Right? The change from stopped working to if you would have been working was one that we're very grateful for and we welcome, because that is the issue. But to sum it up, what is the burden on me when I make my application to prove that I would have been working, or do I have to, or how does that work? What's your advice for our members?
It's going to be very specific to the individual. If they can show that there is a pattern, a historic pattern to working more in the spring, having income come in the spring, and they can substantiate that with records from previous years, that may help. But it's going to depend on the nature of the work. Anyone who has a contract or other agreement that they were to start work at a certain time, that would certainly be very strong evidence, if not proof, that they were expecting to work. And that they are unable to because of COVID-19 having frustrated the commencement of that work. But I think, the short answer is we don't really know. I think there's a lot of good faith in the process, and the government expects people to be honest and upfront about these things, and support their applications with whatever they can put together.
Right. But two comments, and one is that in our discussions with government, we've made the case, we've demonstrated that although our work in film and television production isn't seasonal in the way that you think, for example, of agriculture, where there is a planting and growing and then a harvest season and so on, which is more tied in, obviously to the calendar. when we look through the course of the year, there is a historical tendency for work to increase by the spring, peak in the summer and the fall, and then taper off in the winter. We do live in Canada. A lot of on-location productions happen. It's just the character of our industry is that it isn't seasonal work the way fishing would be, but it's seasonal work in the way that it has played out. So we did make that case, and my impression was that the government, the officials that we spoke to were very sympathetic to that argument and understood it, and some of the changes do reflect that. But I guess my further question would be, is there a requirement, and I think the type of criteria, Clio, that you mentioned that sound right to me, but is the requirement that you make this case when you apply, or that you simply do the thinking as you apply, that's the type of standard that you may be asked at some point in the future to demonstrate. So it's not part of the application process in and of itself. It's just something that might come up later.
Yeah, I think that's right. As I said, there's a lot of good faith in this process, and I believe the applications ask the individual to attest to the fact that they have been unable to find work or return to work because of COVID-19, but it's not always possible to substantiate that with hard evidence.
Right. Right.
So Dave, if I could just jump in here, I think
Sure.
I think that's a fair characterization. There's a lot of, we understand the jeopardy that people are in. Let's put it that bluntly. And the department officials who are administering this, and when the CERB launched, there were 700,000 applications on the first day, 4 million that were processed by the end of the first week. It's quite staggering, the number of people that are relying upon this. And what the eligibility requirements ask you to have is, you need to be over 15 years of age. You need to have earned $5,000 of income in the last year, either in 2019 or in the last 12 months. And I think apropos of an applicant's efforts to demonstrate, here's when I made my $5,000, if it's bulked all in the spring or the summer of 2019, I think you can make a compelling case as to why that looks like basically work that is functionally seasonal. When we conceived of the seasonal sort of exceptionality, yes, we had people who work in the fishing industry in mind in the Maritimes, right? I'm just being candid with you. That doesn't mean that film and TV shouldn't be also categorized in that manner. Since this came up on my last DGC call, I've raised it directly with officials. My staff have raised it directly with officials. We haven't heard back from them yet definitively on that conclusion, but we will raise it again. And know that, and I'm not saying this just because, you're a fellow that lives in my riding who does good work. I do think you actually do good work and you write good letters. But the DGC letters that have been coming through to people like Minister Guilbeault have been important in terms of sort of moving the yardsticks a little bit. And your audience may or may not be aware, but it was around the 17th or the 20th of April, Minister Guilbeault and the Prime Minister announced a separate $500 million fund just for cultural entities and sporting entities that are being differentially affected by COVID-19. Now that begs the question as to, okay, Arif, how do I access that $500 million? I don't have the answer for you yet, but I do know that in the minutia that I've been provided, it specifically outlines people that work in television broadcasting and film and TV production as entities that we are trying to target with that additional $500 million fund. So we're actively thinking about ways to address the needs of the creative industry. And for those people that find themselves, to get back to the question, that they would otherwise have been employed because it's warmer weather brings lots more TV crews, to be crude about it, I think there's a case that can be made that would merit CERB eligibility. And what I would say is, and I'm speaking as a retail parliamentarian, but I represent Parkdale Park. If there are people that live in the Danforth, if there are people that live in other parts of Toronto who are facing this very direct question, I would urge them to reach out to their local MP and have their staff intervene to try and make their case as to why CERB eligibility should be met, because that's our job ultimately.
Thank you, Arif. And on that score, one of the things that we're going to be putting up on the DGC's website in the area where we have the frequently asked questions around the programs is precisely that. It's a link to your local member of parliament, keeping in mind that the participants today are right across the country. So that link that we're going to have up sometime within the next day or so, will allow you to navigate the system so that you can contact your own local MP where you have these questions. And yes, that's right, Arif, I am one of your constituents. We live in the same riding in West End of Toronto, which is great.
Best riding in Canada. Come on, Dave, you can say it. Well, I'll say that for you.
It's right. We're coming live from Dave's Kitchen in High Park. So so thank you for that. The second question is that comes up a lot. Many of our members, keeping in mind that we represent categories across the spectrum of film and TV production, have different different approaches, and that includes in some cases loan-out corporations, or where the person is self-incorporated and pays himself either through the corporation a salary or dividends, as the case may be. So the second question goes like this. Under which emergency program, government program, would Guild members who are incorporated, such as through loan-outs, apply for financial assistance? And with an ancillary question being, if I'm eligible for either, not both as I understand it, but either, what should I consider when I'm assessing whether I'm better off going the route of the wage subsidy or the route of the CERB program? So on the assumption that you can't apply for both, one does cancel out the other, what sort of thing, and I'll just say right up front that one of the messages that we've had is that circumstances, notwithstanding that you work through loan-out corps, that circumstances are different for each person based on their work history and the compensation that they receive. So rather than, I don't think this is a binary question of one is always going to be better than the other, but what sorts of things should someone be considering and talking to their accountant or their tax lawyer about with regard to what might make more sense for them? Any advice on that?
So it's somewhat, okay, so it's somewhat difficult to ascertain, but I'll give you some certain things to keep in mind. One is that the CERB is meant to be a targeted, individualized piece of assistance. So Dave Forget as an individual gets some income security. It's quite rapid, particularly if you apply for the direct deposit model. You can start to see money in your account within 3 to 5 days, right? And that's what we saw when it launched about 2 weeks ago. The CEWS has an advantage of potentially presenting more dollars on the table because, as Clio rightly analyzed, it caps out at $847 per week, whereas the CERB is $500 per week. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. But the CEWS is going to have more rigor in terms of its application, and you need to demonstrate more in terms of persuading the department officials that you merit the CEWS. So she outlined that you need to show a loss of revenue in the month of March of 15%, and then the months afterwards for April and May of 30%. Secondly, the CEWS is right now pitched between March 15th and June the 6th, whereas the CERB runs from March 15th to October the 2nd or 6th. I can't remember, early October. So the CERB has potential more longevity, right? So that's a countervailing factor to be weighed into the equation. To muddy the waters even further, and that's why it's important to get that advice from an accountant or a lawyer, somebody who's giving you laying out some scenarios for you, is that I mentioned this $500 million program, and we don't have the applications available yet, but that's for the arts and culture industry. That program is available to those who aren't accessing the CEWS, those who aren't eligible for the CEWS. So if you were on CERB, you could still access potentially the $500 million funding for your organization. If you were on CEWS, you're not accessing that $500 million fund. Applications will not be forthcoming in that regard. So there's a number of different things that would have to be weighed into the mix. I think for ease of simplicity, the CERB is very direct, very rapid, requires you to show that you made some money last year, you're not making money this year, it's related to COVID, you're 15 years of age, you earned at least $5,000. There are less hurdles, I would presume, on the CERB side, and a less rigorous application as compared to the wage subsidy side. But it is important to understand that if Dave Forget is the owner of the company, he's eligible for both. So, a single owner operator who runs a mom and pop convenience store could apply for the CERB, and the same way even somebody on a loan out, and thank you for explaining what a loan out was because I wasn't familiar with the term, but if you've incorporated for the purposes of working with a production company and you have subcontractors with you, both Dave Forget as the owner of the newly incorporated entity and his employees are all eligible for the wage subsidy. So that's
even if his employee is Dave Forget.
Yeah, even if he only has one employee, yes.
Right. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. I mean, that's a lot of information, but those are sort of the things that I think I would weigh into the mix. I had to give it some thought because we don't often come up against both of them. But I'd also put out the caution that Clio made at the end of her presentation that there's no double dipping. So we are not here to provide top-ups for somebody who's already getting the CERB with additional money through the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. It's one or the other, right? And if you are found to have been in receipt of both, if we don't catch it fast enough, we will catch it on the back end and you will be asked to pay back. And all of these benefits are taxable. So there's no sort of, well, one's taxable income and one isn't. They're all taxable income. So understanding your own taxation situation would be important.
Yeah.
Just one minor point to add is that the period of potential eligibility is slightly longer for the CERB. You may be eligible for up to 16 weeks, whereas the wage subsidy program is a maximum of 12 weeks. At the moment, these programs may change. Now, it's 12 weeks of a maximum 847 per week versus a maximum of 16 weeks times $500 a week. I can't do the math that quickly, but.
And Dave, I would also point out that the wage subsidy is a up to, and it's unfortunate that sometimes that nuance gets lost in the details, but it's not a guarantee that if you're eligible for the wage subsidy, you're getting as much as 847. It could be less, right? So that's a significant factor. Whereas the CERB, because of its simplicity, and we designed it this way, it's $2,000, bang, $2,000, and you may still have your royalties, your small amount of income that's coming in, so you may be making $2,900 a month on the CERB plus whatever part-time work you're cobbling together, versus something that you hope looks like 847, but maybe doesn't end up at 847 under the wage subsidy side.
Right. Just to use your expression, Arif, not to muddy the waters, but the small business loan program, technically you may be eligible as a small corporation. Is there anything here that's mutually exclusive? If you applied for the CERB program, but were incorporated in that way, could you still argue, if you met the eligibility criteria, apply for the loan program?
So I'm going to ask Dawn to send me a message quickly. She's on the line here. She's one of my staffers. I do not believe that there is any there's any discounting with respect to those two because they sort of envisage slightly different things. The CERB is sort of your basic needs as a human being: groceries, food, shelter. The CEBA is for the bricks and mortar of the building that you're operating. So again, the mom and pop example in High Park who's running a vegetable stand. It's for their rent, it's for keeping the lights on, it's for paying their overhead. So the one does not discount the other. So a wage subsidy discounts the CERB and vice versa, but the Canada Emergency Business Account loan that would go to a business does not affect one way or the other your eligibility for the CERB.
Right, okay. By the way, I just wanted to mention, you did mention, Arif, the $500 million that Heritage has to support sort of the arts and cultural community, and obviously including film and television. As I understand it, you know, the way that the CERB program and the wage subsidy program and so on are characterized, you know, correctly, these are universal supports for Canadians right across the spectrum, and that what the Department of Heritage has now is support from the government to provide more targeted support that meets the needs of the cultural community, obviously including the DGC members who work creating film and television. So some of those things may be support for individuals who have lost their livelihood over hopefully a temporary period of time, or the associations that do work on their behalf, or their I don't know, theaters, live theaters that have, no capacity right now to sell tickets and gather and so on. So there's a lot of discussion happening. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is worth mentioning that there is a pool of resources that we'll be talking to government and obviously offering recommendations on how to best help us. And as well, I don't think that's a subject to get into in detail today, but there's obviously a lot of discussion happening around the restart and the rebooting of the industry when the time comes, and that, we're all preoccupied. I think it makes perfect sense with how to maintain a safe working environment for people on a film set, and how that can be reconciled with the needs to protect ourselves as individuals and also be productive. And obviously there are going to be costs associated with those types of things, those extra steps and protocols that we're going to have to put into place. So a lot of good conversation. Now, that's not today's subject, but a lot of good conversation happening out there on that right now.
Yeah,
and so go ahead.
So no, I just add to that in terms of so people understand what our thinking was on the $500 million fund. It's the weather's getting warm, right? This weekend it's getting particularly warm, and that's a concern for a lot of the public health officials, because they're going to see a lot of people outside, and that's not necessarily the best thing. But in warmer weather, we know that there's a lot of folks, particularly in the industry that is your audience, right? Film, TV, cultural creators, artists, etc., that rely upon the income and revenue that's generated from different festivals. So in my riding, the Junction Summer Solstice Festival, the Contact Photography Festival, on a massive scale, film festivals like TIFF, etc. Those are going to be impacted by COVID, even if we are clear of it by September. And what we are trying to be cognizant of is that kind of, it's not even a seasonal, it's almost like a localized sort of for a few weeks a year, a lot of revenue is generated for certain industries. We're trying to be conscious of that and deliver targeted support to those types of entities. So that's the first point. The second point is that Dawn reiterated, she texted me and said, I've got that correct, that there's no impact between the business account loan and the CERB, so that's important. And the third thing is that I'd again encourage you to be as resourceful as possible, either using the Office of your Member of Parliament or using the Canada.ca/coronavirus website, which has all sorts of supports, information about public health, supports for individuals, supports for businesses, etc. Because there's a few hidden gems in there, and I'll give you just one. About 4 days ago, the Prime Minister announced targeted supports for young people, and that was young people in terms of them having an income support, which is a little bit like the CERB, but not quite the same. But there's also something in there where he talked about monetary help for young people who are otherwise volunteering. So imagine in the hook here is that if you have film and TV folks that are your target audience, Dave, that are working in the Directors Guild or in production and creation of entertainment material, and they can make the argument that we're going to take on these young people, have them volunteer with us, but they're going to help us produce things that help cure, for example, seniors' isolation or the mental health anxieties that so many people are facing right now. You can make an argument that those people should be eligible for what's now called the Canada Emergency Student Grant, and we, the government, will pay those students up to $5,000 to volunteer with your members to produce those types of films. So there's little areas where we can help you navigate and find income supports for you or other financial supports for you that might not leap off the page, but help you to get where you're going in terms of continuing to provide the great Canadian content that you guys do on a regular basis. Now it's needed more than ever to cure some of that isolation and some of that anxiety that people are feeling. So I just throw that out there as just yet another example.
Yes, that's a great comment. Clio, I think you mentioned in your presentation that I think it's a good reminder that all of these benefits are taxable. Do the rates, are they different depending on the nature of the support?
I think it'll depend on the tax rate of the recipient of the benefit. So it'll be taxed to the individual, based on their overall income, and to a business as well.
Right. But in any case, a component of the support is one, and I think this is one of the changes, Arif, you might have mentioned it, was modifications that happened that allow individuals on the CERB, for example, to go out and make some supplementary income, if they can, to go out and make a little bit of money. In fact, I on one of the calls was Minister Guilbeault, who gave the example it's not exactly relevant for our members, but it was the example that he used. Someone who's a professional musician whose regular gig is with the TSO might make, obviously there's no concerts happening right now, but they might make a little bit of money on the side giving private lessons. That money, technically, when the program was first announced, would have rendered them ineligible for the program, and that's been corrected. So that's a good reminder too, that there's an opportunity, if you can, to make a little bit of income. Is there any requirement, if you're on EI, there are requirements for regular reporting, and I just wanted to go into the EI side of it for a second. I have a couple of questions about that. Are there any similar type requirements for the CERB program, Clio? Or do you need to report in every couple of weeks, or other than the application?
I believe you need to reapply after each period. So you apply for and receive benefits for a 4-week period. If you want to reapply, you may do so in the next period. But for that 4-week period, I don't believe there's any, checking in or reporting about job search efforts and so forth.
Right. So it's pretty straightforward that it's the same process over again. So there's no added burden of having to say what you were doing.
Dave, if I could just jump in on that, I think that's accurate. What you need to do is provide the same attestation, and in particular, what we're looking for is to find out whether you've started to work or whether your part-time work now exceeds $1,000. And if it does exceed $1,000, this is very important for your membership. That would render you ineligible for the CERB. So making sure that you're calibrating whatever part-time or additional work is happening, such that it doesn't exceed $1,000 would be important for somebody who wants to maintain their eligibility for the CERB. And now that I think about it, going back to your question about 8 minutes ago about CERB versus wage subsidy, the wage subsidy, once the application is made, it covers the 12-week period. And my understanding is that it's one holistic application. There isn't every four-week check-in on the wage subsidy side, whereas on the CERB side, you do need to check in on a 4-week basis for the duration of the 16 weeks that it's available.
What if a person is eligible for EI? I mean, the reason we focus on CERB is because many of our members, because of the freelance nature of the work, don't qualify in the normal way for EI. But what if you do? Do you automatically qualify for the second once you exhaust? If you exhaust EI benefits, can you then apply for CERB and vice versa? Is there any advice? If in applying for CERB, do you render yourself ineligible for EI? And just take people through that for a second.
Okay, so it's a bit again, it's not terribly muddy, but there's a few things to keep in mind. One is that, okay, the simple piece is that if you're already on EI, don't do anything. Just stay where you are. If you've applied for EI and it's in process and you're wondering what's going to happen, it automatically rolls over into a CERB application. Okay. The third point is that EI remains very much a going concern, particularly for individuals that might be doing things like starting a family, right? If you're having a child, you're applying for maternity or parental benefits, EI is the route to go. The best thing I can say to your audience is that the CERB operates as a floor but not a ceiling. And what I mean by that is if notionally you might have been entitled to less than $2,000 a month on EI and you're applying for the CERB right now, you will get the $2,000. So it's a floor, right? You're not going to drop below that floor. Conversely, let's say somebody says, well, Arif, if I applied for EI in the pre-COVID world, I would have probably gotten $2,400 a month instead of $2,000. It doesn't serve to create a ceiling for you. And what I mean by that is that when you are on the CERB right now, between now and March 15th and October the 2nd, you will get $2,000 a month. But if at the end, when the CERB concludes, there is some residual top up that you would have been entitled to, so that additional $400 a month, that EI eligibility still applies. So you will receive that additional EI money that you would have otherwise received just at a later date. So that money will still come to you. It will just come to you in October. So those are the few things I just wanted to point out with respect to EI.
And there's also the date of March 15th is quite important. So if someone became eligible for EI before March 15th, their claim for EI can be processed under those pre-existing rules. But if someone became otherwise eligible for EI regular benefits or sickness benefits after March 15th, they will automatically be processed through the CERB. Whether they apply for EI or CERB, it'll go through CERB.
Right. Good. Well, at the outset, this is a housekeeping note. At the outset, I mentioned that there was a facility for providing your questions in writing on the Q&A, and many of you have been doing that. And as we've gone along, I hope I've incorporated most everything that came up, at least not in terms of the subject matter, into the questions that we've been asking. Nobody has put up their hand to ask a live question. Maybe I should do a better job reminding. I think we're coming close to the end, so I'll make a last call if someone would like to ask a question live, just to see if Dave can figure out how to do it. Nothing else. So while we're waiting for that, I want to thank both of you for really laying out that. By the way, that last piece of information about retroactively topping up EI is that gets definitely a star for in the weeds and really good technical advice.
I'm gonna try and hit this one out of the park, Dave, because I got another little nugget. In terms of that wage subsidy piece versus CERB, one thing that is very much in the weeds is that if Dave Forget Inc. on the loan out, as you educated me, applies for and is eligible for the wage subsidy, and he had a few employees, you are also, not only do you receive the wage subsidy, but the normal thing that you would do on a monthly basis is provide the government the EI and CPP contributions as an employer. You are, that requirement is waived entirely. So that might mean an extra $100, $200 in the pockets of that employer who during the time of the wage subsidy no longer has to make that contribution. So that's an important little piece that is, again, very much in the weeds. You have to read these Department of Finance little releases to figure out stuff like that. So maybe that's another added incentive for somebody who's thinking about applying for the wage subsidy as opposed to the CERB.
Excellent. Clio, any last thoughts for us?
I don't think so. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, and thank the both of you very much for this, a very informative session. And now, think of this as a little PSA. We're kind of in the town hall business these days. We've done, the National Directors Division and district councils across the country have been having events. Everything that we normally do live is kind of moved online, and we've been having a lot of fun putting those events together and putting them out there. So in terms of town halls, just a heads up for everybody that next Friday we'll be doing the fun all over again. Tim Southam will be moderating a session that we're calling Straight Talk About Your DGC Benefits. And so the subject next Friday at 1 o'clock will be your benefits, the health and welfare, and we're going to take questions. We're going to have experts there from Canada Life and Eckler and JD to take you through where we are with benefits and to answer some of the questions that have come up from members. So we're looking forward to that. And then a week from Friday, so 2 weeks from now on May the 15th, we'll do it all over again in French. With the same group, and we'll be out to our members in English next Friday and in French 2 Fridays from now. And next week on Monday, so Monday, May 4th at 1:30, this isn't a DGC hosted event, but it is an event we obviously have many of our benefits flow through Canada Life. There is a webinar on mental health, and you're invited. The link is up on in a message I sent out earlier this week to all members, and if you don't have it, we can resend it to you. If there's interest, you're welcome to attend, and that should be very informative as well. So I'll just end by saying thank you once again to everybody who joined in on a sunny Friday afternoon in Dave's kitchen. And thank you to Clio and Arif for joining us. It was great to have both of you. Have a nice weekend, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we hope to see you all back soon out of our
Dave, could I just add a couple of words just at the very end?
Yes, of course.
Well, I just want to say thank you again for having me. Thank you for letting me share the panel with Clio. It's nice to be on the panel with you, Clio. I just wanted to emphasize just where you left off that, you know, I said that you guys help us deal with the anxieties that we're all facing. Everyone's dealing with anxiety. Everyone's dealing with mental health concerns. There should be no stigma involved in that. We understand that. We're trying to provide supports. Please reach out if you need supports. And I know we all spend time thanking people that are frontline healthcare workers, people that are stocking grocery shelves. But I also want to say thank you to the creators in our communities in Toronto, but across the country, because you are providing that essential entertainment that keeps us a little bit distracted and a little bit moved away from the crisis that we're all experiencing right now. I value that. I know Minister Guilbeault does. I know the Prime Minister does. That's why we're trying to target these supports. And again, if there's further things you want to see the government doing, please reach out to me. Dave can share my email address with all of you. Please follow, you know, websites, follow on social media. It's really important feedback that we're soliciting, and it is a dynamic process. So thank you for what you're doing, and feel free to use us as a sounding board for further suggestions. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you, Cleo. Have a great day, everyone. Good weekend.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye now.